What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Kenny, and I am here with my good friend Stefan. How you doing tonight?
Doing fantastic. What's up, everybody?
Good, man. Yeah, we just hit 10,000 subs, so thank you for all the people that have joined. We had like 600 people join yesterday, so thank you very much. I hope you enjoy this episode because it is crazy. And every week I say that there is a bunch of information to this, and I'm just like, oh, there's so much information. If I miss something, let me know. There is so much information with this case, dude. Like, I think we got mostly everything, and I'm very excited for it. But yeah, if for some reason there's some stuff that we missed that we didn't say, put it in the comments below and start a conversation with
Yeah,
us. Yeah.
yep. And address all those comments to Kenny. Put Kenny at the top. This goes out to Kenny. This is what you messed up.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So tonight we're going to talk about the WWE Superstar Chris Benoit. Many of you probably know him as a pro wrestler in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, but there's really a lot to this story. So it's pretty interesting. We hope you guys really like it. This has been requested by quite a few people that we
Yeah.
cover this, so we are obliging everyone who asked us.
Yeah.
Let me see here. So there had been a couple conspiracies formed around his death as well, which we'll address. There's, like Kenny said, there's sort of a lot to this case. There's been speculation about why Chris would do the things he's done, and it's been blamed on all sorts of stuff: mental health, steroid abuse, all the
CTE.
normal suspects.
Yeah, a bunch of stuff. There's a bunch of speculation as to like exactly what happened with this episode or with this case rather. So yeah, let's get into it. So Chris Benoit was born in Montreal, Quebec on May 21st, 1967. He was born to Margaret and Michael Benoit, and Chris spent most of his early life in Edmonton, Alberta. From everything I read, it seems like Chris wanted to be a professional wrestler pretty early on in his life, aiming to be like Bret Hart and Tom Billington. Through high school, he continued to pursue his dreams, and he won multiple awards in wrestling and bodybuilding. Benoit even trained at the Hart Family Dungeon, receiving his training from none other than the owner and creator of the gym itself, Stu Hart. Friend and professional wrestler Chris Jericho said Benoit's only job ever was wrestling, and he always did everything at 1,000%. And, hard to get to know initially, which is, yeah, pretty much how Chris Benoit was. He was very silent, very to himself, and I didn't show a ton of emotion a lot of the time.
As Benoit grew over the years, so did his physical style of wrestling. In 1985, Benoit began wrestling at Stu Hart's Stampede Wrestling promotion. Benoit even adopted many of his idol's moves, such as a diving headbutt, which will be a common theme. We'll probably mention this a few times, especially when the CTE conversation comes in.
Yeah.
So just keep that in the back of your head. The young wrestler paid homage to Tom Dynamite Kid Billington, initially billing himself as Dynamite Chris Benoit. Chris was a very physical performer, and anyone who watched Benoit before this knows exactly what we're talking about. Yeah, this guy really did give 110%.
Yeah, so Benoit had a storied history in wrestling, making a ton of appearances over time. And after moving on from Hart's promotion in 1989, Benoit moved to Japan, joining New Japan Pro Wrestling in 1986. And also worth noting here, during Chris's time in Japan, he would end up meeting future wrestling superstar Eddie Guerrero, where the two became quite good friends. The two instantly hit it off and would keep in touch over time in the entertainment industry. And keep in touch over time is that's a loose way of saying it. They became best friends. I mean, extremely, extremely close friends. I mean, if you just watch videos of them and you watch videos of them talking about each other and Chris talking about Eddie, I mean, they were unbelievably close.
Yeah, they were close in friendship and also in their careers too.
Yeah.
They like moved to the WWE together. It was WWF at that time, but yeah, they even moved together and came over to the promotion. So yeah, they were real tight.
Yeah, and at first they didn't really get along. They had a lot of fights. They argued a lot, and through that, they sort of built this bond and eventually became best friends. But in between Chris's time wrestling in New Japan, he would have stints in the WCW, the World Championship Wrestling, from 1992 to 1993. And as well as the ECW, the Extreme Championship Wrestling, from 94 to 95. And while in the ECW, he took the persona of the Crippler, which is, in 1995, Benoit would return to the WCW where he would make a 5-year appearance.
During the course of his career, he would marry twice. In 1988, Chris married his first wife, Martina, and the two would end up having 2 children, David and Megan, but would split in 1997. After that, Chris met Nancy Toffoloni. Their introduction was as dramatic as their end. Nancy was a professional wrestling valet and model in the 80s and 90s. She would marry twice before meeting Chris. First, in 1982, to Jim Dowse, and then a few years later, she met Kevin Sullivan. Nancy was selling programs at Orlando shows and appeared in apartment wrestling features. She was still married when she first met her future husband, her future second husband, that is, Kevin Sullivan, who wanted her to be a part of his wrestling entourage. Nancy became an on-air valet, taking the name Fallen Angel. Nancy split from her first husband in 1985 and later that year married Sullivan. During the mid to late 90s, Nancy and Kevin traveled the United States using their gimmick as Satanists in a classic bad guy fashion. And by Satanists, we mean a very loosely Satanist. He had paint on. He like shaved symbols into his chest or whatever, and was pretty freaky. Wore a hood, that's about as Satanist.
Yeah, I mean, they would act out pretty, like
ritual type
rituals
stuff.
And we're Satanists, blah blah blah. But
maybe not as overtly as we would think current day as a
Satanist.
Yeah,
that's true. Like back in the day, they weren't like just absolutely insane Satanists on stage or whatever. I don't know if on stage is the right in the ring, I guess, but
and I think it kind of goes. He was sort of probably even playing on the satanic panic of the '80s and pulling at heartstrings that way. I mean, he tells stories. Kevin Sullivan tells stories about being in the Bible Belt and running into a lot of issues with people who didn't like his.
And Nancy was the same thing. She said that she would have people come up to her and pray for her in the grocery store because they'd see her being all satanistic on TV. It's pretty insane, but I guess it is what it is.
She said she was proud of that too, by the way, because she was doing her job right.
Exactly, yeah. So in 1996, Nancy would actually be appearing under a different persona, a woman. So she had moved on past the Satanist bit herself. And, she was still, in an on-screen relationship with Kevin Sullivan at the time. But Kevin Sullivan was, a writer and a booker. And so he was making up a lot of these stories. And he actually wrote in that Nancy, as woman, would start an on-screen relationship with Benoit, and that would start an on-screen feud between Benoit and Sullivan. During a post-match interview with Sullivan, a home movie of the couple canoodling in a kitchen was played in front of him. Woman taunted Sullivan by saying, "You can't find me and I'm my own woman," while Benoit added, "You consider yourself the master of human chess. Well, I'm the bishop, just took your queen." Or my bishop just took your queen, rather. And that was kind of a mic drop moment. It was, basically the on-screen relationship. It became really real, but it moved into a whole new sort of thing where in real life, Benoit and Nancy started messing around. And with that, the on-screen feud moved off-screen between Sullivan and Benoit as well.
Nancy's final WCW appearance and professional wrestling appearance as woman took place on May 26, 1997, on Monday Nitro, as she accompanied Benoit to the ring for a confrontation with Jimmy Hart regarding the whereabouts of Sullivan, who wasn't in the arena. On the following week's show, Benoit came alone to the ring. After managing him for a year and a half or so, no reason was given for woman's disappearance. And she was never mentioned on the WCW programming again.
Yeah, and it was actually half a year, not a year and a half. But I want to say something real quick too, about Chris and about Benoit and Sullivan's like on-screen and off-screen fight or feud. There was a match where a real life match, and this kind of happened right after Nancy and Benoit got together off-screen, and so there was actually a lot of real life tension between Chris, Benoit and Sullivan, and there was a match, and basically that match ended, but the fight didn't end. And right before the match ended, they started having real blows with each other, and the fight took itself backstage, and they actually had like a real fight, and that was kind of the pinnacle of like, you know, all the dynamic between all three of them.
Yeah, the final transition from, Benoit really, claiming Nancy as his own, and that was sort of the end.
Yeah, yeah. So in 2000, Chris Benoit's life was at its peak. On February 25th, 2000, his third child, Daniel, was born, and he and Nancy married in November of that year. He joined the WWF, WWE, and at this time, he was an international superstar and won the Continental title 3 times from 2000 to 2001. As his career moved on, he was able to wrestle with his buddy Eddie Guerrero on the same team for a while until the eventual dramatic wrestling betrayal in 2003. So, a lot of story stuff going on between them. But 2 years later, in 2005, Eddie Guerrero was found unconscious in his hotel room by Chavo Guerrero. By the time paramedics arrived, it was too late and he was pronounced dead at the scene. Now, this is a huge, huge, huge moment in this story. It's what I would consider the turning point, the complete pivot from how Benoit changes in his personality.
It really is sort of the catalyst to the events that took place. I mean, that may be. I think anyone, all of his friends sort of acknowledged this, that he was never the same again.
Never the same. And Chavo Guerrero, who was another friend of Benoit, another wrestler and part of the Guerrero family, which was a very famous wrestling family, he found Eddie Guerrero still alive. So he wasn't actually dead. He says that he died in his arms.
Right, sort of like gasping for air and everything, which is so traumatic.
Yeah, I mean, extremely traumatic. And the thing we didn't mention is Eddie used to have pretty significant issues with drugs, and he was addicted. I can't remember exactly what he was addicted to, but he did have some pretty bad drug problems. And so it's sort of, but he got sober, but we're thinking, well, did he have a relapse or something?
He was also a really good influence on Chris as well. Like, he got Chris super into God and was like trying to get him on the right path.
Yeah, yeah. Eddie Guerrero was very religious, but he actually died of an acute heart failure due to an underlying condition. So at 38 years old, actually something that they didn't know about.
Yeah, they found him in his hotel bathroom, toothbrush still in hand. He was brushing his teeth. Mm-hmm. So sad.
Yeah, and Chavo Guerrero had talked to Benoit very shortly after this, and he told Benoit that Eddie had just passed away, and he says that all he heard was just wail from the other end of the phone. And this is someone that has never really shown emotions too deeply. He wasn't a very emotional person, but after this, he couldn't stop crying. He couldn't get out of bed. It was like he lost a partner in life, and that's how significant this event was in Benoit's life.
We should mention also that Eddie Guerrero's wife and Nancy were friends, and like after his death, she was the one consoling Eddie's wife, trying to make sure the kids were fed okay. She was over there helping. Yeah. So I mean, these people were close.
Yeah, the whole family was very close.
She also talks about how like when Chris would go over to the house, he would like go to Eddie's side of the bed and just lay there and cry. And I don't know, everyone that talked about Chris Benoit after Eddie's death really makes a point to say that he was super super saddened by this.
Yeah.
I don't even know if that's really the right way to put it, but this had a massive impact on his life. And yeah, he really was never the same after.
Yeah, so on Chris Jericho's podcast, Talk is Jericho, which was recorded in 2016, Sandra Toffoloni, and honestly, I'm terrible with pronunciations of last names like this, so I'm sorry if I just butchered that. She's Nancy's sister, and Sandra talks to Chris Jericho about the last year and a half of Benoit's life. The two have an interesting dialogue about some of the signs that presented themselves regarding Benoit's behavior before his death. Sandra said she began to notice a sense of unsafeness and paranoia from the family. That's a quote from her, from Benoit. He would constantly be checking the alarms at night. And she mentions how, when heading to the gym, he started taking different ways every time. And she says he would take up to 30 different routes to get to the gym that he would go to every day. And he also occasionally wanted to take different cars. And that was never an issue in the past. None of this ever was. Benoit had become impatient and a drastic personality change, becoming a more nonsense type of guy. And after winning the title at WrestleMania, Chris Benoit could no longer live even a half normal life. He was a legit wrestling star in his own right at this time, but it would come with its own sacrifices as well. And, something to point is after Eddie Guerrero's death, Benoit never stopped wrestling. He went right back to it like a week later. I mean, he was really depressed. Obviously, he was deeply saddened, but he was a workaholic as well. And so maybe for the first few days, he couldn't get out of bed, but eventually, very shortly after that, he went straight back to wrestling.
Yeah, I think Chris Jericho talks about this too. Like, I think when they were all in the hotel, there was a whole bunch of wrestlers getting ready to like fly to Europe to do a sort of little tour over there, and he ended up going.
He did, yeah, right away.
Jericho describes Benoit as a private, quiet, and shy guy, and how being consistently bombarded by fans was not easy for him to handle. Although Benoit has said to have been loyal to his fans, and he always tried to make time for them when he could, even went out to dinner with his family. During this same podcast, Sandra talks about how the pressure of the inevitable end to Benoit's pro wrestling career fell heavy on his mind. Combined with the death of a few other colleagues and his best friend Eddie Guerrero, Benoit was said to have truly been crushed and not in good shape mentally. And I think all of these things really would combine to culminate the events that would eventually change everyone's life involved.
Okay, yeah. So let's go ahead and get into the main part of this case.
Yeah, on Saturday, June 23rd, 2007 at 3:30 p.m., Chris Benoit left a voice message to Chavo Guerrero stating that he would be late for the night's show in Beaumont, Texas. Benoit said he had overslept and missed his flight. When Guerrero calls him back, Benoit answers. He is stated to have sounded tired and groggy, but still reassures Chavo that he will in fact be able to make it in time for the match. Chavo then calls Benoit back 12 minutes later at 3:42, worried about his coworker's trouble-sounding voice. There's no answer from the WWE star.
So yeah, whenever Benoit didn't answer that phone call, Chavo basically left a message saying, "Just call me back." And at 3:44, Benoit did call Chavo back and basically said that he didn't answer, 2 minutes before because he was on the other line with Delta trying to change his flight. And now, that probably wasn't correct. Maybe it was. Who knows? Benoit stated that he had a real stressful day due to Nancy and Daniel being sick with food poisoning. And Benoit also told Chavo, Chavo, I love you. And, Chavo said it wasn't very unusual that he would say, I love you, as they were very close friends, but it was the way that he said it. And Chavo said it felt weird. And, Benoit would never show up in Beaumont, Texas that night. Unaware to the WWE, Benoit had killed his wife the day before by choking her with a cord, strangling her to death in the bedroom of their Georgia home. Benoit would also soon take the life of their 7-year-old son, Daniel.
On Sunday, June 24th, 2007, between 3:51 and 3:58 a.m., Benoit sends 5 text messages to 5 different coworkers, one of them being the aforementioned Chavo Guerrero. 4 texts are sent from Chris's phone, and 1 message goes out from Nancy's phone. The first, third, fourth, and fifth messages read, "My physical address is 130 Green Meadow Lane in Fayetteville, Georgia." And for whatever reason, the fifth message omitted the word physical. The second message, believed to be sent to a neighbor, said, "The dogs are in the enclosed pool area. Garage side door is open." The WWE is notified by the coworkers of Benoit about the messages just 2 hours before the bodies are found by police. When the WWE figures out that something is wrong, they contact the police to do a welfare check on the house. And when the cops show up, they see that there are 2 German Shepherds outside, so they contact the neighbor. And the neighbor says, she feeds the dogs while, Chris and Nancy are out of town, so it's not a big deal. She's friendly with the dogs. And so they get her to basically hop the fence of the house, and the neighbor gets the 2 dogs and then walks through the house. And that is initially when the bodies are found. They are found by the neighbor.
Yes, she was the first person to find the bodies, not the police. Yep.
Right. And when she did, she runs out of the house. As she was running out of the house, she saw the WWE wrestler Dave Taylor and his wife walking near the house.
Yeah, and so this is kind of a weird little thing that happened. So Dave Taylor he was a WWE wrestler, and she came out freaking out because she had just seen these bodies, right? And she remembers seeing Dave Taylor and his wife near the house. And the reason that we bring this up is some people believe that the WWE had called Dave Taylor as well to try and, because he lived nearby, to try and get him to figure out as much information before the police got there. This has never been proven, and honestly, there isn't much evidence to point towards this. And the reason the reason I want to bring it up is because a lot of people on the internet bring this up a lot. It's one of those theories that goes along with this case. But it doesn't actually make sense, because if the WWE contacted the police, why would they contact both at the same time? Why wouldn't they just contact Dave Taylor? It's just something I thought we should bring up because it's always talked about.
Yeah, more information for you. So when the police entered the Georgia home on Tuesday, June 25th, they found a grisly scene. Nancy is found in her bedroom, bound by her wrists and ankles and covered with a sheet. A Bible has been placed by her body, presumably by Chris.
Yeah.
Nancy had bruises on her back and stomach, which were consistent with the theory that Chris had used his knee to hold her down as he strangled her with a cord. 7-year-old Daniel is found in his bedroom, also with a Bible placed near his body. County District Attorney Scott Ballard said the boy had internal injuries to the throat area, but showed no bruises.
Yeah. And that's pretty weird. I don't think anyone fully, that whole autopsy report Daniel was kind of weird in the first place. It kind of goes back and forth as to what they think happened. And because at first everyone thought that, they choked him with that Benoit choked him with a wrestling move. But that's basically been proven false. I mean, for one thing, Daniel was too small for that to happen. And also there would be bruises around his neck. So I think the general consensus is that Daniel was smothered. But at the same time, he had bruises on the inside of his throat, so some type of strangulation did occur, but they don't think that is actually his cause of death.
Yeah, it's hard to say. Hard to say.
If for some reason someone has some information out there that is contradictory to what I just said, let me know. That's just what I've been able to come across as far as Daniel's death, because there's a lot of controversy around Daniel's death. It was a huge thing.
There really was, and a lot of misinformation too that
Tons
was put
of
out.
yeah. You can read a bunch of different things about Daniel's death online.
How they found like injection.
Yeah, but that's bullshit too.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll talk about this coming up, but lots of weird stuff.
And also, at first Benoit didn't leave. They didn't think that Benoit left a suicide note, but he did. It was inside of the Bible that was next to Nancy's body.
Benoit himself is found in the basement of the home, asphyxiated, sitting on his weight machine. He had removed the pull bar to the machine and attached a cord and added 240 pounds of weight, weighing more than himself, obviously, essentially hanging himself on the machine. A Bible is also found resting on the weight machine, and there's a bottle of wine right next to the weight rack too, which is
and there's empty beers in the house. But I think during the autopsy we might talk about this in a minute. Yeah, no alcohol was found in his blood, but I mean it would probably be gone possibly by the time they find him.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah, so on July 17th, 2007, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, in a press conference, stated that Nancy had Xanax, hydrocodone, and hydromorphine in her system. All levels seem to be consistent with someone who is taking these drugs as prescribed. However, it was stated that Nancy was not sedated at the time of her death. But Daniel, 7-year-old Daniel, did have Xanax in his system, which obviously should not be the case. It is thought that Daniel was sedated before he was killed, and elevated levels of Xanax and hydrocodone consistent with therapeutic use were found in the body of Chris Benoit. No steroids were found in his urine except for testosterone. And like I said earlier, no alcohol was found in his blood. So yeah, police theorized this wasn't an act of rage, and everything seemed to be thought out and methodical, but that wasn't always the case. I mean, so he was taking testosterone, and this is because he had been previously taking different types of metabolic steroids in the past, and so he needed testosterone to sort of level things out. And because of that, there was a lot of speculation that roid rage was one of the main causes of this. But that doesn't actually make any sense. I mean, for one thing, the deaths took place over a period of days, right? So Daniel was killed first, and then Nancy, and then Chris. So it's not like this was roid rage, like he had freaked out and then killed them and then shot himself an hour later. I think this case has so much misinformation, which is why it kind of made researching it a little bit hard. But there's so much misinformation on this case that in the beginning, people didn't even know the order. They didn't know how they were killed. They didn't know the time frame of which they were killed, and that he killed himself. So roid rage was a big speculatory thing for a lot of this case. But we know now that just doesn't make any sense. Yeah, so Dr. Gary Wadler, who's an expert on anti-doping and has served on multiple research committees, agreed, stating that it was a premeditated act, and that's not rage. Former wrestler Christopher Nowinski contacted the father of Chris Benoit, suggesting that years of trauma to his son's brain may have led to his actions.
Tests were conducted on Benoit's brain by Julian Bales, the head of neurosurgery at West Virginia University, and the results showed that, quote, Benoit's brain was so severely damaged it resembled the brain of an 85-year-old Alzheimer's patient. He was reported to have had an advanced form of dementia similar to the brains of 4 retired NFL players who had suffered multiple concussions, sank into a depression, and harmed themselves or others. Bales and his colleagues concluded that repeated concussions can lead to dementia, which can contribute to severe behavioral problems.
Yeah, and this is probably the biggest, in my opinion, probably the biggest cause of this.
I feel like it was the most overlooked too at the time that it happened.
Yeah, at the time that it happened, everyone wanted to focus in on steroids. And at the time, no one really wanted to talk about CTEs and, all the concussions that Chris Benoit, he has talked about it before all this happened, obviously, and about how many concussions he's had that just went overlooked. And, if you look, I'll put this on the screen right now. So if you look at this, you can see his brain and the amount of damage that has happened to his brain. And it's just like you said, he resembled the brain of an 85-year-old Alzheimer's patient. It's insane, man.
And like, if you want some perspective on like how much CTE, I mean, let me just put this into perspective really quick. This man's job was to cause damage with his head. That was his like move. He would just ram his head into you. Like,
and it's wrestling is quote unquote fake, but I mean the head hits are not.
Yeah, getting hit with a chair. There's
Dude,
nothing.
You're getting hit with a chair.
I mean, you got to respect it. I'm not even a wrestling fan, but you have to respect the dedication and the hard work of these guys doing it 300 nights a year. It's insane.
It's insane, man. And it's just getting hit over and over. I mean, and
but I feel like CTE wasn't really talked about during this time. Maybe it was like more by scientists, but like there wasn't a term for it back then.
And and even if there was, I don't know. Even if it was, it definitely wasn't talked about like it is today. And if the NFL really, I haven't looked into that, but it seems like it really brought a lot of light to concussions, man. Like, it's a huge deal now, and people really actually pay attention to it. But for a long time, they didn't at all.
Even the WWE after this started to like make contributions to the research on CTE, concussions, and trying to do whatever they can to, make their wrestlers as safe as possible.
Yeah. So when the media got wind of the fact that Benoit was taking testosterone, there were speculative reports stating that Benoit was giving his son growth hormones because he believed his son had Fragile X syndrome. However, this was later determined to be false. Sandra Toffaloni, Nancy's sister, had a legal document created that gave her custody of Benoit's son if anything happened to Chris and Nancy at the same time. So basically, if Chris and Nancy were killed in a car crash at the same time, and for whatever reason Daniel wasn't there, he would go into Nancy's sister Sandra's custody. And because of this, she was his custodian when they all died. And, she states that there was zero evidence that anything was wrong with Daniel, that he didn't have Fragile X syndrome, and that there was no evidence at all that Chris was giving growth hormones to him. And there was a lot of news, and it was actually, I can't remember who released this. I'm sorry, I should have written that down. But rumors of track marks on Daniel's arms came out, and Sandra saw his body and said there was nothing like that. And that the idea that Daniel was, was being given steroids by Chris was just...
It's untrue.
Yeah, untrue.
Didn't happen.
On June 25th, 2007, Chris Benoit's Wikipedia page was edited. And this might not seem like a huge deal. After all, anyone can edit Wikipedia pages, except for the ones that are locked. But just hours before the police found the bodies of Chris and his family, his wife and his son, someone edited in a statement on the Wikipedia page explaining that Nancy had died, which is pretty insane, right? So just hours before they actually were found, someone went into his page and edited it in that Nancy was already dead. So it's crazy. Chris Benoit was supposed to show up to the ECW World Championship match to fight Johnny Nitro, as we've already kind of gone over. When Chris didn't show up, this led to widespread speculation online. And the Wikipedia edit stated that Chris Benoit had not shown up to the match due to personal reasons stemming from the death of his wife.
Remember, this was hours before the police found the bodies, and a couple days after the deaths took place. No one should have known about the deaths at this point. How could a coincidence of this magnitude take place? I mean, that's pretty crazy that someone were to just, make that post.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The police were able to trace the IP address of where this edit took place, and they traced it to Stamford, Connecticut, which is also where the WWE headquarters is located, coincidentally. It turns out that this was just a huge coincidence and nothing more. It's something that people have talked about for years, but it was determined that the person who changed the wiki page just had simply found the rumors online about Chris's mental health issues, and that's why he didn't show up for the match. He used this information to come up with his own theory, a theory that he then put on Wikipedia, and essentially we're still talking about it to this day because he did that.
I mean, it's insane. Like when you really think about it, someone just, I mean, the same day, you know, and it really, like you said, it comes down to just speculation that he saw online on the online boards, and that sort of thing. I mean, everyone, I'm sure other people were like, oh, man, well, wouldn't it be crazy if he was dead? And then he was like, well, what if his wife died? And also, one thing to mention, this guy who edited this page, when they went through his history, he had edited a bunch of pages, like tons of pages. Like there were a bunch. I mean, one was for The Sopranos, but there were a couple other ones too. Like at least, I mean, more than a couple. He had just been going around vandalizing Wikipedia pages. So
Yeah, police called him, or I'm sorry, brought him in, talked to him, and they determined pretty quickly that he really had nothing to do with the murders.
He was a 19-year-old kid just messing around.
Just a kid goofing.
Yeah, so we know that the Wikipedia edit was a coincidence and had nothing to do with the murders. But there was one person who thought that maybe there was more to this story than a simple murder-suicide. Johnny Angel was a wrestler in the 80s, and he was also a national figurehead for the KKK. I think that's the right way to say that. I mean, he was well known within the KKK on a national level. He probably states that he grew up in a racist household, and at some point, Johnny would have a turn of faith and become a preacher, and he travels and talks to crowds about his life story. So why are we talking about Johnny Angel, right? Johnny believed that Kevin Sullivan, Nancy's ex-husband, of course, who we've talked about, was responsible for the murders and framed Chris Benoit for them. He claims that this was for revenge and that Kevin Sullivan was a high-ranking Satanist, and the police should look into this theory. He claims that all of this, even though he never technically met Kevin or Nancy during his wrestling career. And I don't think he had a very prolific wrestling career. It didn't seem like he was too good.
I never heard of him.
Yeah, and the reason we bring this up is because it gets talked a lot about on the internet. And again, there's no real evidence for this theory. It doesn't really make any sense.
I'll tell you what, those pesky Satanists just murdering families for no apparent reason.
But he's written a lot about this. He's done a lot of videos on YouTube. You can look up videos on YouTube of him talking about this. It's insane. He believes that, Kevin and Nancy, their Satanist personas that they had in the ring were real life. But it's funny because Satanists aren't bad people. They're not like, they don't even believe in Satan. It's like, it just seems like they would because they call themselves Satanists.
Right. It's sort of a goof.
It's not a goof. It's just like a way of life,
well, it's like a troll. It's like you're basically saying, that's how I was informed. Satanists use Satan as sort of a troll, making fun of religion and how crazy it is. And that's why they call themselves Satanists, to get that reaction.
Yeah. And so, and some people take it really seriously. It's pretty interesting, but it's not a religious group. So it's like to say that Kevin was a Satanist and that makes him bad, and therefore he killed and framed. It doesn't make any sense.
It's just important to realize too that being a Satanist and worshiping the devil are not the same thing.
They're not at all.
They're on different levels here.
Exactly. Yeah, they don't do that.
Another theory that gets tossed around on the internet is that Chavo Guerrero heard an intruder over the phone while he was talking to Chris. About 45 minutes into a conversation, Chris told Chavo that someone was knocking at the door. Chris then sat the phone down and opened the door, and supposedly Chavo heard a scuffle and the line went dead. Chavo and Chris would talk 3 hours later on Chris's cell phone. People say that this shows that Chris let the killer in himself, and that whoever it was forced Chris to talk on the phone 3 hours later. However, there's no evidence of this, and it was eventually found out that it was just made up.
Yeah, it was just made up. And again, it's something that we want to mention because it gets talked about sometimes online, but it is definitely fake.
It is bull honky, people.
Yeah.
Often when talking or even thinking about how people can commit such horrible acts, we propose an interesting dichotomy. Was it nature or nurture that led to this eventual outcome? Personally, I find this limiting. Having to decide between the two options doesn't seem like a fair way to view someone if you're trying to understand who the person really was, which was what, at the very least, we're attempting to do here. People are complicated, capable of being nurturing, yet controlling and unhinged, loving, yet abusive. Humans seem, at least speaking for myself, to have inherently have a plethora of contradictions within us all. I think it's important for us to understand that he wasn't just some evil guy. He wasn't just an evil man doing evil things. It's a lot of complicated issues happening here.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that really comes like when we talk about Eddie Guerrero and sort of how that affected his life. It's I don't know, it's a huge, yeah. It really shows that, yeah, like you said, he wasn't evil. He wasn't like a sociopath that was born and was going to be a murderer or a serial killer or something. Yeah,
It was
it's really
clearly the
complicated.
years of brain abuse and among other things, but
And
yeah.
also, what you just said was beautiful.
Well, thanks. I wrote it myself. Not a big deal. Just kind of a poet, if you will.
Yeah, listen, everyone. Thanks for checking us out. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah, hope you guys liked it. Let us know what you think. And if you have any problems with what we said today, let Kenny know.
Yeah, let us know. Let me know in the comments. I might respond. We'll see. I try to respond to everyone, but I don't get around to everyone. And if you say something real mean, it's typically, lately a lot of people have just been defending us. I know we don't have to defend ourselves.
Yeah,
a lot of
watch
people do
out.
it for us, so it's pretty cool.
We got people in the comment section, so check yourself.
Yeah, it's 41 minutes right now. If you're still listening and you like our stuff, consider subscribing, liking the video, all that sort of stuff. And we love you all.
Love you guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Oh, don't do that. That's nasty.
Bye.